Good evening. This is the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting, February 12th, 2013. Al, could we have a roll call?
Mary Jane Brady.
Present.
Terry Carney.
Present.
Al Pfeifhouse. Present. Eric Wagoner.
Present.
Leanne Charlotte.
Present.
Mark Berry.
Present.
Susan Ryder.
Present.
Thank you. First thing we have is communications. Do we have any communications or questions from visitors? Well, we do. Okay. Would you like to step up to the microphone?
Okay, do I need to state my name?
That'd be great if you
Okay,
could state your
Heidi
name.
Bailey. Do you guys want to state your names?
Ashley, Emma Johnson.
Okay, well, as part of our Wellness Committee program, every Tuesday in advisory, we focus on traits that we'd like to see in ourselves and in others. During December and January, we've been focusing on kindness. So these are two of my advisory students who want to tell you just a little bit about a project we've been working on.
Great.
Our advisory chose to make a video on how easy it is to be kind. We started working on the video before winter break and worked on it most days throughout the month of January. We showed this video to the entire school at our January Bluffer Assembly.
One of the things that we wanted to highlight in this video was that being kind is easy. We demonstrated different acts of kindness that people could do every day, such as holding the door, picking up books, and helping someone with a jammed locker.
We also talked about Random Acts of Kindness Week, which is going on this week. We challenged students and teachers to do random acts of kindness throughout the whole week in order to create a positive environment around our school.
We wanted to practice in Random Act of Kindness Week by bringing a treat tonight for you to enjoy. We encourage you to participate as well. We can also go to the middle school website under the news section to see the video we created. Thanks for listening.
And this is Zari. Zari's here, part of our advisory too. And so we do have some cupcakes for a random act of kindness for all of you guys.
Oh. Well, how kind is that?
That's very, very kind, very random.
Now, will you be continuing the cupcake bringing to all the meetings?
It wouldn't be random anymore.
National Random Act of Kindness, yes.
That would be regular, not random.
Yes, we could go for a regular act of kindness, you're right.
At least bi-monthly.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Guys, thank you for coming to our meeting. What a pleasant surprise.
Made our day.
And thank you for doing such a neat project. We're looking forward to seeing your video. So if we go to the middle school side, is it on the front page?
All right. Okay.
The news section, okay.
Somebody made these? I mean, obviously somebody made them,
My
but,
plate, I'm not particular. Well, I guess we're doing it.
So much. Thank you, everybody.
That's for Dr. Sophie.
Dinner anymore, right? Valentine's Day covers.
I'll share it, take one home and share it with
That's right.
Did you?
I can't.
We have to feed you?
Thank you. That was so nice of you.
Very much.
Girls,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great week.
Shirts and everything.
Need somebody to cut it up
Yeah.
and
Teachers should have an act of kindness and give it.
I'd gladly.
It's great. All right. So I don't know, are you guys planning to stick around? We're going to have a policy discussion next, and I think that'll be a lot of fun for you.
let's be kind to them.
Is that a Believe Act?
That's all right.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
well, next on our agenda, we have policy discussion, which we purposely moved to the front of the meeting. As you know, our legal counsel, Terry Hodges, is here this evening. And I'm just going to kind of walk you all through our discussion for this evening. The first policy that we're reviewing is our FMLA policy, policy 5.185. That particular policy, as I had shared in our last meeting, I really wanted to switch over to the Hodges and Louisi version of this. And then Terry and I did have a discussion because there were some things covered in our teacher contract that deal with FMLA. She had to really align this policy with our teacher contract. So Terry's here if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will bring this meeting for first reading on February 26th.
I would have only one question. Terry, was there anything striking that you could summarize for us that needed to be changed from your original version to align with our contract?
Yeah, really, FMLA is so regulated in the federal rules. The FLLA is extensively regulated in the federal rules. There are two general components, however, that typically a district has some leeway in determining. As I looked at your teacher contract, though, those decisions appear to have been made. You have a pretty complex provision already in the bargaining contract. So I think at this point in time, you wouldn't want to contravene that. Usually in a school district, you have the right to determine how the 12-month period in which an employee can take 12 weeks of leave is calculated, and there are different options. You run on a July 1 through June 30th fiscal year basis by virtue of your teacher's contract. We usually look to a rolling backwards or a rolling forwards alternative method as being slightly more favorable to the district itself. Again, I had to align it to your teacher's contract, so I didn't take advantage of that. The second provision that is commonly looked at by a district is the provision in the law that allows paid leave to be substituted for the unpaid leave. And again, at least as I read the language in your teacher's contract, at this point, the teachers have the right to elect whether to substitute their paid sick leave and personal leave time against the unpaid. So that theoretically means that a teacher could consciously choose, and I assume you're going to apply that throughout the district now. All employees will be able to consciously choose whether they want to run their sick leave concurrently with the unpaid leave. And if they choose not to, they retain that unused bank of sick days for use later on. Okay?
Great,
The
thank
rest
you.
is pretty much law.
Great.
And as you suggested, Terry, there isn't anything that requires that we do the same thing for the non-bargaining unit staff. We could choose to have 2 different calendar years, for example, 2 different years for
Correct.
bargaining unit staff.
Correct.
And the substitution of paid leave, we could make that distinction as well. But I would agree with you, there isn't really a lot of upside to making a distinction, right, between people covered by the collective bargaining.
I think it would be really confusing within a district. Yeah, I think you change over all at once, if and when you want to change over.
In the rolling calendar year distinction that you were talking about, employers from the very beginning kind of went to that rolling calendar year, and as compliance with FMLA has gotten more complicated, actually, and more people are availing themselves of the FMLA, some employers have moved to this set calendar year, the set period year, just for ease of administration. So there is some benefit to it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing I liked about the year you have defined, the July 1 through June 30th, is at least it distinctly covers a full school year.
Right.
I think the regular press policy talks about August 15th through August 14th, and that can cut into 2 school years, which gets very confusing.
Great. Thank you, Terry.
I got a question. I guess it's section B or paragraph B, and you kind of talked about a little bit, combination with other leaves.
Yes, that's the one I was talking about.
Yeah, I found that very hard to, I must have read that 15 times, and I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around it. I apologize for being so thick. But there's a couple of things in brackets. Are those things that we are going to make decisions on? What says may elect or may be required or will be required? Or is that
I
the way
don't
it's
think
gonna
you
be?
have a choice anymore. I think
No,
you
there
have to,
isn't.
right, you
leave
have
all
to,
those in there?
No, we have to include may
elect.
because it's up to the employee under our collective
Because
bargaining
it's,
agreement.
because it's in collective bargaining. Okay.
Correct.
If that's the case, does the last sentence contradict that? Any leave, whether paid or unpaid, taken for FMLA qualifying reasons, shall be deducted from an employee's total FMLA leave? Because I kind of read it as if you can take concurrent. You can, I mean, not concurrent, you could stack them. 12 weeks of your own and then 12 weeks of FMLA. And that, I'm not a lawyer, and I apologize, but it's not clear to me.
I think you raise an interesting question, because you can stack them in this district.
And that would suggest that,
And that kind of says you can't.
right,
Right.
A qualifying
Yeah, I
reason and
would
wanna use
delete
your sick
that.
time.
I would delete it.
Okay.
I don't think it adds anything, and I think it causes confusion depending on how you interpret it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Point.
found that paragraph hard to read.
Anything else?
Anything else anywhere in that? I got one more. Sorry. D, spouses employed by same employer. I gotta catch up to my note here. Let's see, if leave is taken by spouses who are both employed by the board for birth or placement of a child, for adoption or foster care, to care for the child after placement of birth, or to care for the employee's parent with a serious health condition, such a leave is limited to a combination of total of 12 weeks worked. We have people who are married in this district. So if hypothetically, one of these circumstances arose in their life, they can only take a total of 12 weeks?
Under FMLA regulations,
Oh,
yes.
that's FMLA, that's not our
That's not,
contract.
no. Now, there's nothing to say you couldn't afford a greater benefit, but the required leave comes from the regulations. Yeah,
By the federal law, they're only guaranteed the 12
Right.
total for the
All
two.
right. Get
Nothing in the
clarification.
contract contradicts that.
I don't
I don't think so.
call that.
It
I
may
think we'll
just
need
be
to
silent on it, and therefore,
I recall it was, yeah, we didn't change it.
Refers back to this, the federal
I think we need to
policy.
double check that, but I don't recall seeing anything contradictory.
Terry, if you put that in your notes to check it, then you and I can talk about that and make the other change on it.
Okay.
Is everybody comfortable with then adopting this policy, and then we'll take the administrative procedures from this also, so we'll have both.
So we'll have this on for February to adopt?
We'll have it at the February 26th meeting for first reading, like we would do with
And vote
any-
in March?
And vote in March.
we will not be voting on the procedures, though.
No,
correct?
the procedures do not get voted on, right?
Just policy.
But what I'm trying to do as I bring policies to you is make sure that we have the administrative procedures in our notebook. And that's one of our projects next year, is to go through with all of our administrators and make sure those are up to date. We do have them, though. The next policy, and Terry, I apologize, I was dealing with another issue and did not email these to you, so I'm gonna read the key paragraph. As you know, with field trips, my concern was the big field trips as far as many legalities with that. So I had suggested that we deem field trips a little bit differently than the trips like outdoor ed, Washington DC, Springfield, et cetera. So I'm gonna read just the first two paragraphs, Terry, and I'll specifically highlight the paragraph you came up with from my former district. The Board of Ed encourages field trips when the experiences are an integral part of the school curriculum and contribute to the district's desired educational goals. That's from Press. The next paragraph that you helped my former district with is, the Board of Education may also approve optional educational tours. Example, outdoor ed, Springfield band, Washington DC tours for its students which promote and contribute to the district's described educational goals. Next paragraph talks about how the board has to authorize based on written rationale for the trip and the educational value. And then the final paragraph talks about parents and guardians shall be given the opportunity to consent to their child's participation, are responsible for the entrance fees, food, lodging, or other costs, except that the district will pay such costs for field trips for students who qualify for free school lunches. What that's saying is, a child that goes to Washington DC that may not be able to afford the trip, because it's considered an optional tour, the district would not be obligated to pay for that. On all field trips, a bus fee set by the superintendent or designee may be charged to help defray the transportation costs. All non-participating students shall be provided an alternative experience. I believe we do that already for all our trips. Any field trip may be canceled without notice due to an unforeseen event or condition,
Such as a hurricane.
such as a hurricane this year.
Okay.
So,
There are a handful of press policies that our firm feels a board really should spend a little bit more time on and think through. And this is one of those policies. Ironically, the school code really never defines what constitutes a field trip. It's referred to indirectly in several places. It talks about the board being authorized to transport kids to and from field trips. Also refers to the use of school funds being used for field trips. And it is very clear under ISB's regulations for the waiver of fees for indigent students that the regular curricular field trip has to be paid by the district for those students that can't afford to pay it. In contrast to that sort of nebulous roundabout definition of field trips, there are two provisions in the school code that specifically deal with these other distinct kinds of away from the class activities. One is a provision on outdoor education programs, for which school funds can be authorized to use. And the second is for what are known as educational tours. Educational tours cannot use school funds for meals and lodging and those kind of purposes. School funds can be used for educational tours to pay the salaries of teachers who would regularly be involved in the activity. So I think those are the distinctions that somehow need to be reflected in a district's policy. Ergo, those are drafts we tend to supply to our client districts. And again, for educational tours, there's no obligation, there's a distinction actually under ISB's rules for not being required to, waive the fees and pay.
I think that it does bear quite some degree of discussion in terms of what really triggers an integral component for a trip. For example, outdoor education may be integrally connected to a curriculum and where it's not really appropriate to designate a trip like that as an optional tour.
Correct.
If it's an ongoing part of a program that not only contributes to the goals of the district, but also is something that the kids bring back to the regular classroom.
Oh yeah, I think outdoor ed clearly is part of the curriculum, the way it's structured under the school code. As opposed to, the common example is the 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C., which in many districts is clearly an educational tour. It's not a field trip. It's not outdoor ed.
so that may have to be the further discussion with this policy is what you want to deem a field trip and what you want to deem an educational tour. That's what I think I hear you saying.
That could be part of it. I think what's also not clear for me is what we as a board not may approve, but must approve. It says we encourage field trips, so it doesn't sound like we should be approving field trips, but it says we may approve optional educational tours. Should we be or not? I mean, that's sort of, when would we and when would we not?
It's interesting because the press policy actually says in there that if you're going out of state or beyond 200 miles, I think, which I can add that back to the policy.
Right.
And certainly, I think anytime kids are going to be spending the night, that was another determining factor, if a child's going to be spending the night somewhere. So I need to add that language back onto this policy, which is not in there.
I simply had the impression that in the first paragraph where it's an integral part of the curriculum, it's really not the board's responsibility to get involved in micromanaging that stuff,
I agree.
So,
I think the bigger piece, though, is if they are spending the night, I think that represents a whole different liability scenario for a board.
I'm sorry.
Some of our outdoor ed is outdoor over the night, and some is day trips. So that might be something that I'm going to need to hear from all of you on. Let me take this policy and certainly see if you have any other suggestions or comments for Terry. I'll work on it and bring it to first reading, and we can talk a little bit about how to better define educational tour and field trip for this district.
The skiing trip is, it's clearly not a field trip, but does it fall into the bucket of the optional educational tour? or is it yet a third kind?
Is it the fifth grade baseball game? They do that in fifth grade? They go to the Brewers game every year?
Yeah,
Right.
that's a tour. I don't know how,
Educational it is. Is it yet a third category that isn't covered at all, or ought it be covered as yet another thing?
In my opinion, as your superintendent, we will be looking for a community group or something to sponsor the ski trip next year.
Well, I want to add on to that. My thought here was, one of the things that came to mind is, we talk about curriculum. One of the things we have, I believe it's included in curriculum, is we have all these social emotional goals for the district.
That's true.
You could make the argument, I think, that some of those kinds of tours have social emotional benefit beyond traditional curriculum. So maybe you could work them into.
And there's also, just to the extent, and I'm speculating that there may be trips like this, but trips that involve fulfilling one of the physical education requirements of the district, where it's, kickball tournament or something out there, where it's not what one would normally consider a curricular function, but nonetheless, it is part of the normal programming. For
Actually, having
students.
chaperoned on the baseball trip, there is a math component in the trip.
That's right.
There is actually.
So I think probably somebody needs to tie down for us a
Right.
little bit the curricular components of the trips and decide which are which.
I have a-
Maybe bowling next year?
In my opinion,
I have a
too,
question
that's one of
about-
the things that makes this town really special.
I
is
agree.
Things like that. I'd hate to see that go
I
away
agree.
because of this
but the
kind of-
question, I guess the question comes down to too is, okay, maybe it's special, but maybe it doesn't need to be sponsored by the school. My question about this policy is whether districts ever rule out certain kinds of activities in their field trip and educational tour policies.
Absolutely. I think as districts go back and look at these policies, many boards for the first time look at the laundry list of the kinds of activities that have actually been sponsored, and you will get different levels of squeamishness about the liability risks. And so one of my client districts probably 10 years ago had a student drown in the 7th grade Springfield trip, the night pool. They're extremely careful, they're not doing that anymore.
We don't swim, just so everybody knows, we're not swimming.
We don't swim.
But I think it might be worth looking at for this policy, is there something that we would rule out? And because I think, for me, there would be certain activities that I don't think we should sponsor. You have too broad a range of kids involved. It's not like just deciding for your own child. We're looking at, a large group. I'd like us to look at that, if there's anything.
Best practices.
Yeah.
Research.
Two other points, as I heard the board discuss real briefly when it should be involved in approving a trip. Most commonly, the educational tours will be sponsored by the district, there will be a third-party provider who's actually involved, and there should be some kind of contractual arrangement. I've seen in those cases that oftentimes that is relatively slipshod and could cause you liability risk. So obviously that kind of contract should come in front of a board. The other level of protection you can create is beginning to really tailor your parent consents and release forms to the activity. A lot of the outdoor ed programs, for example, will have a horseback riding component, big, bold, special permission if you want your child to participate in the horseback riding component.
And that's something that your firm would help us with the disclaimers.
Yeah.
Do you have any for skiing trips?
Or is that one of those activities that you specify
I didn't know
not?
any of the Illinois districts still went on skiing trips, but.
Well, so it sounds like we need to work a little bit on, and Terry can look at some other districts, I can ask superintendents, what kind of things do you not allow in this policy? And maybe that's a better way, because it leaves a lot more open to what the kids can do, but then it also draws the boundaries. And I think that's where, comfort level wise, bingo's a good game too, besides skiing.
Don't have to go too far for that.
Don't have to go too far.
Like Jane get hurt playing bingo, though.
Yeah.
Carpal tunnel injuries.
You know, the other practical piece of advice is you need to check with your insurance carrier and see how they view the level of risk and whether coverage is there.
Jane, if you could get on that for us, and then we'll need a little bit of a answer on that when we bring this back. So it sounds to me like, Terry, you and I need to add back some of the press as far as what comes back to the board. We need to find out what other districts may say as far as not doing, and then we can work on some disclaimers and some permission. One of the things that I think, and it's something that I'm really paying attention to, is I know in my former district, all the contracts with the third-party carriers were all signed by the board. So that might be something that we want to write within the contract too, because it sounds like that, wasn't aware that could be an issue. So that might be something we want to work on too.
On the element of fees, can we just make it clear when we are on the hook versus when we're not for the people who are eligible for school lunches? It's not that clear to me. It just, you could read it that all trips are eligible for the district to cover, where you made the verbal statement that if it was an optional educational tour, we aren't. I just think if we can make it clear when we are and when we're not, I think it just, so anybody who picks up this policy doesn't see the ambiguity that I'm seeing right now.
And just to be clear, a field trip is a distinct trip from an educational tour by this definition, so we are on the hook for field trips, but we are
Right,
not.
I get that, but that paragraph doesn't say whether it's applicable to a field
So
trip.
we can
and/or-
clarify that a little bit more. This was done right before I started in Westchester. Actually, they took a vote at my very first board meeting there. So I think that Terry and I can now, clean it up and make it apply for here. But I wanted you to see what some of the things that she'd done with that. Any other questions for Terry on that? Because we'll move right into any questions you might have had on bullying. I did make the suggestion. I ran by some of the things from Terry. She added a couple other things. If you notice on here up at the top, it's easy to see what she's reviewed because she'll say the date and what her suggestions were. She also tied it in with a couple of our other policies, which I think is important. So I'm going to leave it for any questions for Terry while she's here.
My question, I raised the question on this one the last time, and this is one of those policies that I worry about. We're trying to define everything up front, but it's one of those areas that seems like it's constantly evolving. What if something is obvious to everyone, that some bullying incident occurs, that it's obvious to everyone that it's bullying, but we hadn't thought about it yet? Do we have catch-all enough in here to cover that, to allow discretion?
He's talking about we had talked about all the protected categories.
Right,
What if
which is-
something wasn't in the protected categories?
Well, that's why I suggested you insert the first sentence in that second paragraph, which is a much
Any type or
broader
on basis.
statement, right. The specified categories really go to the type of bullying that the U.S. Department of Education is now telling us may be a violation of civil rights. I personally find this policy confusing too. The state board, through the school code, requires all districts to have a bullying policy, but the problem is districts also have on the books the harassment and intimidation policy that basically adopts the same definition of
overlap a
bullying,
lot.
and they overlap.
What's the difference?
Another question I had was down, it's the start of the third paragraph, bullying is prohibited in each of the following situations, and it goes on a list. My question was, what about bullying that's conducted off-site, but carries on to, but the effects affect the child on campus?
So if it happens on the playground on the way home from
They're
school?
walking home, or maybe it's on the weekend, and they started it, and yet they're smart enough to not do it on the school grounds during on Monday through Friday.
Or using a school computer, right?
If there's no disruption to the school, we
Well,
may
there
not.
would be if the child is feeling the effects of the bullying, just being in the presence of the bully, it's just a very.
That should fall under number 2, if it's severe enough.
Okay, good.
I noticed that it said the term bullying means any severe or pervasive, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, I don't know, should this only address severe, like, severe and pervasive? So it's not bullying if it only happens, twice a week, it's not,
That's the slippery slope on bullying. I mean, kids will be kids, so an occasional nasty act, are you going to define that as bullying?
It's hard to say. There's going to be times when you will and then times when you won't. It depends on the situation.
And if the nasty act violates one of the acts of misconduct defined in your conduct policy,
7.190.
right, then you will act on that.
Another question under, let's see. It's the second page, item 2. It's a small paragraph. It reads, examines the appropriate steps to understand. And then it goes on, to understand and rectify conditions that foster bullying, intimidation, and harassment. This contemplates taking action to eliminate or prevent these disruptive behaviors. My question is, why is it contemplate and not require taking action to change these behaviors, to make this change?
I think you can change any of these steps that you want to. Press puts these out as suggested steps, and I have many districts that will pick and choose among all of these enumerated items. So you certainly can clarify whatever you want to clarify here.
So, Mark, in number 2, instead of saying contemplates, we can say requires.
Or maybe indicates?
If that makes sense, maybe, I just wonder if there's a reason for the word contemplate that I haven't thought of, but something to consider.
Any other questions while Terry's here?
Everybody good on bullying? All right.
I will make that change. And then finally, the community use of school facilities. There's 2 different things I want to talk about with that tonight. One is the actual policy, which when I referred back to press, it's the same policy that we have, the one on 2007. Terry will talk to us a little bit about that. I think I see as a second issue, the facility usage fees, which we can talk about in a minute. I think I have it down now. I think I've heard from all of you, and I think I have it down, so we'll get to that in a minute. Can we talk about the policy first? Terry, do you have any comments on the press policy?
This is another one of the press policies that I think really has to be looked at seriously by a board. In this general form, I think it's very confusing to anybody in the community who reads it, and frankly wouldn't give an administration, I think, enough knowledge of the board's desire to put together administrative regulations. The school code has traditionally contained a provision that allows districts to have outsiders use their facilities, so it won't be disruptive. More recently, a second provision was added to the school code that allows community organizations to use school facilities. So that's when this last press version was updated. What I find is that because there's such a pressure to use district facilities in many areas, and because there's problems with prioritizing, and there's strong views among different board members in different districts about charging fees, not charging fees, whether to charge more to certain users compared to others, that those districts have taken more time. So it's fairly typical in districts to see that they will create some kind of categorization of users. So for example, I brought a sample. School-related organizations are given first come, first served basis.
That's what we have.
And those are then defined for clarity. And I think some of this should actually be in your policy rather than just left to procedure. So school-related organization, districts, groups that are affiliated with the district, your PTO, your scouts, those kind of things. School-related youth organizations, government agencies, you can rank those in any order. Some districts want to take the precaution that school-related youth organizations have a certain percentage of the membership coming from the school district. So you're free to impose any other restrictions that you want. Some districts don't want their facilities to be used by for-profit groups.
In
One-
policy.
Yeah, in
You like to see those kinds of things called out in that, okay.
That's what I mean. So, looking at the press version, I'm not certain what your philosophy is here.
Well, I'm gonna, see, and I didn't send this to you because this is our facility usage fees. But we have it broken down between school district, activities, scouts, community service in district, which are youth organizations serving children up to 8th grade. Community service in district service organization, churches, government groups. Community service out of district youth groups, churches, government groups. Then we have for-profit groups where school district students participate, for-profit groups where children do not participate. Our kids are not involved. So those are our breakdowns, but
Okay.
what I hear you saying is we need, if we can agree on the fee structure, you're saying that we need to incorporate it in our policy rather than just have it the fee structure.
Well, right now, as I look at your policy, there's a allowance in the first paragraph for community organizations to use your facilities. There's allowance in the second paragraph for student groups, school-related organizations, and local governments, no cost. And it's other organizations, and I don't know how broad from your policy these other organizations expand to, are granted the use of facilities but have to pay fees and costs. So with that kind of policy statement from a board, the rest of the policy leaves it to the superintendent to develop procedures. So I wouldn't know if you as the superintendent would know where to go with that would reflect the policy of the board.
That's why we've been talking about it.
So I see, the other thing I think is missing is, I think it should be a punch list, maybe a checklist, that should be in the policy relative to the insurance coverage, waivers, things like that we need to manage the liability of other groups using our facilities. Maybe some kind of document that, states the intention of the group using the facility, making sure that's, legitimate, truthful. So you really, know what you're getting into, and the individual signs it and all that good stuff. But I don't know how this is working today, but, I think there's just got to be more coverage relative to the things that have to be done to ensure that the liability situation for the district is well covered as well. As, the fees are interesting in the categorization, but if somebody gets hurt, who's on the hook for it, make sure that.
Terry, would you suggest that those things like insurance policy be in,
Well,
and coverage would be in the policy?
In most districts, yes. I mean, in some districts, they leave that kind of detail to the procedures, but if a board wants to make a statement to its readers, the community, about what must be included in the administrative regulations, so there's an expectation of what they have to do, you could certainly do a bullet. The administrative regulation shall provide for insurance or liability coverage, supervision, those kinds of things.
Do we feel pretty comfortable as a board with the groups that we have here? Could we have Jean and Terry work on the policy wording to align with what we have here with the groups and add in the things about the intended use of the facility by that group and the provision of insurance
Supervision, all that stuff.
coverage?
I think we haven't really talked about as a board what, if there are any groups or entities that we would not want to have use the schools, and I don't know if that's something we should talk about before we send them off to.
Do you want to address that at all as far as equal?
Well, I think you should be comfortable with your categories.
We have no responsibility to allow anyone to come in. It has to
Absolutely
be
not.
consistent with a public interest, but I think you're asking, can that be more circumscribed than that?
Yeah, I guess we have a category for profitable groups. You're saying that some schools don't allow that.
Correct. Your policy refers to local government, so is that local government only in Lake Bluff? Would you allow neighboring suburb governments to use your facilities?
And this press policy simply says municipalities, plural. So in the press policy, the one I'm looking at anyway. Oh, it looks like it's our policy. It says municipalities, plural, so that would imply that
I'm not sure.
Libertyville wants
Right.
to use it. We let them use it free of charge.
Right.
And I'm not sure how
But,
that's
but we have the
defined.
right to tell anybody no, correct?
Correct, but you can't do it based on what we call viewpoint discrimination. So you want to make sure your categories are clear so that you rightfully can judge whether the organization fits within your
Let me give you an
qualifying
extreme question,
categories.
extreme question. What if the KKK wants to hold a meeting in our gym? What category do they fall under, and how do we not let that happen?
We
Now
need,
they're a political group, right?
yeah, we
if they
need
came
the,
tomorrow.
well, that's another thing. Many districts will say no political activities can be conducted by.
I mean, is
any
there a
group
way to
using-
allow the League of Women Voters to continue doing debates, but not allow things that would be disruptive to the school community?
Yeah, there should be some lead-in language.
So Terry, if
That the
we
board
could-
has the right to stop any group that will be disruptive to the,
You and I could sit down with these groups, and you could come up with the legalese to help us better define based upon your recommendation of what you've seen.
yeah.
I was really struck by the survey that, Jane, you must have done, at the wide variety of categorizations, of prohibitions, of cost structures. One that was interesting to me was the distinction people, some districts, A through Z, made between things that happened when the custodian was otherwise on duty and things that happened when no custodian was otherwise on duty. That was an interesting distinction that we hadn't talked about. And some made the distinction between weekend rental and during the week rental, costs being different, I think, on those different days, depending on the cost of the HVAC and, various other custodians perhaps. So that survey was very enlightening to me in terms of just the numbers of different options and variety of considerations that go into this. It sort of made me feel better that we weren't the only ones struggling with these kind of distinctions. The other thing I thought of is lots of places excluded scouts or made that a non-pay group, and I'm glad to see that. I think one of the reasons we're glad of that is that it's right after school, right? I mean, it wouldn't make as much sense if it was weekends. Do you know what I mean?
We would need to work with them they would have to pay for custodial.
Right, exactly. And so I think that there's distinctions around time that also make sense. And I think when we say scouts, we're probably including Indian princesses and.
That was my question. Is it Boy
So-
Scouts and Girl Scouts? Is it Indian Guides? Who is Scouts?
So, right, so I mean.
What's the last one?
There's another one called Indian Guides, which is very similar.
Oh, Indian guides are just like scouts.
Well, then
Right,
it's to say that.
so I assume that everybody, other districts have grappled with this this same kinds of
Don't leave out the
issues.
princess.
And I appreciate the survey, Jane, because it pointed out all the difficulties that we're having are not atypical.
Please let the record reflect that we will be adding Indian princesses and Indian guides, because they need to be on here.
I'm going to throw one more hot issue in there. And before I moved here, I lived in two other districts in New Jersey that specifically did not allow Boy Scouts to use the school facilities. Concerns with discrimination. Just want to know if we have any thoughts on that.
Is it because of the political stands that the group makes?
I know they
They
it was
discriminate
upheld in
on-
the Supreme Court back in what was it, 2000 or whatever, that they were allowed to do what they do, but are we allowed to do that?
So Terry, do you have any advice on that?
Yes, we're allowed to do it in Illinois, many districts do. Some would rank the Scouts in their particular district as a school-related organization if the Scouting charter was actually sponsored by the district, so they wouldn't even consider it a youth organization. So you get
Ours
into
here-
the same question, though, Mark.
Ours
whether-
here locally is not a school charter. It's actually an outside religious organization charter. But they have always, not for the actual big meetings, but the small meetings of moms and dens usually occur at the school.
Well, it made me feel better about all the debate that we've had about it, because it's not a simple,
No, it's not. Districts struggle
It's
with
not-
this one.
yeah, whether that brings us any closer, I don't know. I thought that these categorizations, these categories, A through G, were closer And I still have questions about how you define this and how you define that, but it made me think, looking through everyone else's, it made me think that maybe we're missing something with that time of day, that custodian already on duty concept, because that really drives cost, doesn't it?
If we have to have a custodian on duty for supervision, we let the group know that, and they do have to reimburse the district for those costs.
Custodian.
We don't do it as part of the rental fee, a higher rental fee. They have to reimburse us strictly for those labor
Policy
costs.
should say that.
So do we do that whenever they're there on the weekends, or what?
If it's outside of a regular time where we don't have custodian on duty, we have supervision there, we tell the group, you'll have to reimburse us for.
Okay, so we have that covered elsewhere.
Should put in the policy.
So I hear you saying we should capture that in policy.
Yep. So it's full disclosure to the
Is there
community.
anybody that we just absolutely wouldn't want to rent to? And do we need to say that if that's the case? Or like we can just turn people down if we don't want to have them?
How do other districts do that?
Market, Monster
You
Truck
could say no
Rally.
political organizations.
So political organizations,
Just kidding.
if you wanted to. You know what I would say, so in the spirit of time, is let Terry and I go operate on this policy a bit and bring back to you what I think we're going for. I think fee-wise, the fees are reasonable, but we will not bring those back to you till we have our groups better defined. But it sounds like we're making progress.
Yeah, yeah, but sure.
We're making progress. So
How
this is
many
good.
years have you been working on this one?
That just proves that policy development is a grave responsibility of the board, you know?
Yes, it is.
We take
It's
it
a
very
main
seriously.
policy, and I think what Terry's talking about really with all of you is saying, let's put your goals for this actually in the policy, because you all feel pretty strongly about that, so. We will bring that back. That you will not see on the February 26th meeting, because Terry and I are gonna need to operate on that one a little bit. Everybody okay to move on?
Yes.
Very quickly, update on reciprocal reporting agreement. I have Terry here in case you have questions. After this, she's gonna exit. We do have a reciprocal reporting agreement with our village police. I don't know if anybody is aware of that. In my call with Terry, she called another attorney in the firm who did all of Lake counties in 2000, all of them. So she is researching where the copy of ours is. I've already talked to Drew Irwin. He will have his copy, and then we're going to update it based upon any legal changes. Terry, you want to briefly talk about what exactly that means, what a reciprocal reporting agreement is?
Yeah, this change went into the law probably 15
Yeah.
or so years ago, requiring all districts through their local parent-teacher advisory committee to develop guidelines and an agreement for reciprocal reporting with their local law enforcement officers. And the reason that the law did that was to provide for easier sharing of information between schools and law enforcement regarding student criminal activities. In Lake County, the ROE took the lead because you've got such an intertwining here between unincorporated areas and incorporated areas, and developed, and my partner Heather Brickman, as Jean said, worked on that, developed a model agreement that we think every district signed off on and assured that you would have the appropriate local law enforcement and the sheriff's office, everybody else sign off. So she's trying to recover that agreement. We've been able to do that for other districts that didn't know where it ended up. So we think you have one on file. As I talked to Heather briefly this afternoon, while there have been changes in the law over the past 13 years, she believes that the agreement in its current form is flexible enough to pick up those changes. So she's not certain whether the ROE at this point is going to want to work on any revisions. So what we have to capture for you initially is a copy of that initial document so that you can see what it says. But it's something your local parent-teacher advisory group should be looking at on a regular basis to make sure the guidelines are still comfortable.
Are you talking about the parent-teacher advisory that you need under policy 7.190?
Which is your discipline policy, yes, it's little, right.
I don't know if we got one. Okay.
That's the
We'll
one.
be working on that this year.
Is this policy applicable to the local police department or also the county sheriff, or where does it go?
I think it's only,
Depends,
where it happens.
Yeah, where your district,
No with a sheriff, so,
do you have unincorporated areas?
Yes, we
Yeah,
do.
right.
So we're on it, we're working on it, and I will bring you all copies. And finally, the easiest part of this is, I said I'd update you with Terry here on the tri-board meeting agreement. It is pretty much just a resolution. It's the one that authorizes the village and the park district and our board to work together. One of Terry's associates sent it to me this afternoon, so it will be in the board packet for approval on February 26th. Once we approve it, we're going to be the leaders, then we'll send it out to the park district and the village for approval. So it's more of a formality, just establishing the fact that you have two board members on a committee, so I will bring that to you. And Terry kind of oversaw that too. So Terry, we have homework that we're going to be doing. Any other questions for her before she moves on? Thank you for coming, Terry.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the outdoor ed classroom. Joanne? Yeah.
Well, since you were talking about field trips, we have a short one you could take. You have the proposal in front of you that, with the help of the Alliance, we had the organization come out and sort of explain what this outdoor space can look like and the purpose of it, and waited quite a while for their proposal in terms of cost, and recognizing that the cost they set up with the company they used was, I think, a surprise to all of us in regards to how much it was. But what I want to mention is a couple of things. First of all, I hope you don't look at it as a frivolous thing, because we went into this knowing that it had a lot of connections to our curriculum: science, math, art, music, literature.
Social emotional.
Social emotional, just many ways to connect. And the consultants that have been helping us with curriculum, for example, Anne Rochelle, who worked on science with this district years ago, who's back working with us now, we know we'd be able to bring her in to help us incorporate it all the ways into the curriculum. So we consider it a valuable aspect to what we're doing with curriculum. Whether we go to the extent it is, there's choices we can make within here. They gave us pretty much the maximum of what can be done. So, there are ways we can make choices within what they proposed. I think you're probably going to explore other design firms or whatever to see if there's a way to get the cost down.
I think it's the landscaping.
Landscaping, yeah. And I know there was a question about location, and I think Jane supplied, or Jane did, with where it's located. And there was a question that's come up about why not Sullivan Woods, is that right? Because part of this would be located outside some classroom windows, et cetera, and are there concerns about that? We were told that the noise level is minimal because of how it's supposed to be set up to run, et cetera. So we're pretty confident that that's workable. At the same time, and there were questions about Sullivan Woods being something you'd have to maintain then. And we'd have to obviously get rid of trees and that kind of thing. So that's part of the question that came up. It doesn't mean it's out of the question. We would just have to take many things into consideration if we were going to use that spot, just as we will.
Where's Sullivan Woods? Is
Is
it?
it right, the piece of woods right on the road?
Oh, right in the front. Okay.
Joanne, though, with the street behind it and the parking lot in front of it, I mean, isn't that a far less desirable spot than this tucked in behind the building?
Right, but that
spot?
question came up,
Right,
so
no,
I
I
wanted to
understand.
make sure
No,
that, yeah.
but wouldn't that be a consideration too, is just the safety getting to and from it and while we were using it?
Yeah.
In terms of safety, it would seem much better where it is.
Right.
In this diagram.
Which is why that was the consideration.
In addition, I'd just like to point out that this is one of the places that the landscape folks told us was irredeemable, right? This
Well, or to
space.
wait yeah, they didn't want to bother with it, to
So,
plant grass for a long time.
It seems like killing two birds with one stone, kind of.
And I don't think it was irredeemable, but I think it was going to take a lot of work to do something with it to make it
I may have
grass.
overstated that a little bit, but it was
And- and-
bad
Yeah.
Dan gave it a pretty bad review.
of
other-
that space.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He said, really,
Don't
to grow
bother.
grass, don't bother for a couple of years. So this appeals to me.
And the other pieces, and I think I mentioned this last year, there is a lot of research and more of it coming out. You know, there's organizations now, No Child Left Indoors, and how much children are spending time indoors on video games, et cetera, you know, and so, and much, you know, there's more calling out for recess time, et cetera. This is not recess per se, but it gets children outside, it gets them doing worthwhile activities, gives them a different break from the classroom, a different learning environment. So, I mean, I think there's many of us who consider this something that we hope the board will consider, but we know cost is something that obviously has to be taken into account in figuring out how we can afford and how much we can afford, et cetera. Questions I can
I think
answer?
the other things that I would add is, while we can't move on a formal plan at this point because of the strategic plan, we're keeping our staff in the Alliance from applying for grants. So we would like to, we're not going for a vote tonight. We'd like to move forward and really start looking into our grant opportunities. The bigger picture is, you know, in discussions with Todd and his group, really making it more of a community-type place so that we may use it during the school days, and on the weekends, it could be some kind of a
Right.
community involvement. We'd have to figure out the utensils that go with the different station and how we would do that.
Well, they actually, you know, they recommend storage cases that are locked, that are specific for science equipment and that kind of thing, but then the other parts of the spaces can be used by the community, and it would be certainly a reach out to the community. That's a good thing.
Would kids have access to this during recess? Is there a fence between those two areas?
It actually goes from one playground to another.
Microphone.
Okay.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. It goes, the playgrounds connect, is that what you're saying?
It's almost in between the two playgrounds, so when we talked about it, we did hope that it would be a use for a recess, that it might be a nice alternative in place of just the typical playground for recess as well.
Unless there was a class there.
Right.
It's not
Well,
used.
no, it wouldn't be used
Nobody
in a
uses it. We checked with the wellness teachers if they use that space. Nobody uses it currently.
So that's another alternative too for that.
This is northern Illinois, and we have a fair amount of rain and cold weather. To what degree is that going to have a negative impact on use of this with the unpredictability? And was there any consideration given to any roofed spaces, gathering area, or anything like that, so it could be used even when it's raining?
They have lots of opportunities. Obviously, they cost money, but yes, you can have areas that are covered. They have, it
Even
wasn't
areas for
plastic.
shade,
Yeah,
for
shade.
sun.
They expect you to put shaded areas in.
I can just foresee a teacher planning the curriculum, and then, gee, it rains every day for the week, and that plan's shot.
Right.
But the true philosophy would be, you take
go
your rain
out
boots
anyway.
out and you go and you would prep those kids and those parents and say, bring rain boots, bring your extra pair of clothes, and we're gonna go out there.
Having participated in some field trips that were just about canceled because it was drizzling.
Right, but the
It's an
idea,
effort to make that happen.
absolutely.
Very
The
much
idea of
so.
this is to start to break some of that
Barriers.
barriers that people are, you know, afraid of the outdoors. Yeah.
Well, and it also gives our community in the summer, it would be a great place for families to come and visit. So as we approach it, I think we approach it as, it is part of our curriculum, and this is a great time as we look at our science standards, and Joanne works with that. And the other piece is, it's a great time, I know that part of our strategic plan will be involvement in the community, and I really felt like the Alliance and our staff feel strongly that they like to have that too, so.
And I think they're looking for some guidance on what would be allowed for fundraisers. And I think with grants, at least my experience with grants, we know we have to look at the grants carefully, because who gets to control what's going on there then, depending on the grants, and I know the board would want control of what happens with that space. So, I mean, we just have to think of all the parameters that you'd want in place as we pursue, if we're going to allow fundraising, if we're going to go for grants.
Joanne, is there a wide variety of grant opportunities available
You know,
out there?
more and more are surfacing now with the movement for more outdoors. And even some, like, was it Lowe's?
Lowe's does a toolbox
has,
for education. Home Depot does as well. Clorox does.
and we kind of stopped looking after a while, because if we
Sure.
weren't going to apply, it was,
Right.
but we could start to pursue that, at a greater level.
There's other grants out there that if you post it onto their website, it ends up being a voting, so you get your community to vote, and then the grant with the most votes actually ends up winning the grant, or a portion of it.
I'm curious, looking at the landscape plan for this, if we've looked at, or if we could look at what's involved to maintain it.
That was part of the recommendation,
Right.
wasn't it? I remember reading that.
I mean, what
Just
they
pulling it up.
use for materials, et cetera, are pretty much maintenance-free, as much as that. I mean,
Okay.
There's nothing that's ever maintenance-free. What's the right word? Limited.
It's low maintenance.
Low maintenance.
Yeah.
So equipment, but I'm also looking at the
grounds, you mean?
the grounds, yeah, because keeping it weed-free, keeping the
You've got existing turf grass there that you want to look at.
rid of.
That I'll pass on to Jane.
Well,
Burn.
if you were going to go ahead and do this, that whoever the landscape company is that would ultimately do the project, they're going to prepare the site accordingly before installation of the various other plant materials and walkways, et cetera.
Well, I mean, we removed a bunch of plants from the front of the elementary school because we couldn't keep the weeds out of it. So I think this looks beautiful, but we'd have to do it, if we went into it, we'd have to know that there was an ongoing maintenance cost.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to involve a lot of weed maintenance. That's going to be a huge issue.
Yeah.
But
It's not going to be a great classroom space if it's got a bunch of weeds that makes it look kind of derelict and.
But I don't know what the prep is to this site. I don't know what's
So we would
done.
have to probably look into that at some point.
And we could have the gardeners, there's a gardening section, they can weed.
Identify the good weeds versus the bad weeds.
And that's a good point.
Get them ready for it.
Eileen reminded me that their ideas, and the one we would have chosen is the
Headline salad.
planting, et cetera, is done in flower boxes
Raised garden.
for raised garden to help lower costs on maintenance.
I mean, I'm just saying even in the grassy area, because I would actually love to see this happen, but I also want to see our school grounds look really well maintained and, clean for people to be there. And so I don't want to create a situation where we're then not going to be able to do the upkeep and it doesn't look good,
That's all built in the plan. We're not going to know the costs until we go out for bid, and we can't do that formal vote till that time. But I think we're going to move forward and look at grant opportunities for this.
What does the Alliance or others need from us in order to pursue grant opportunities? Do we?
They're just going to start.
We're
We're
getting the go-ahead from you.
We just, okay.
Is there an Eagle Scout project in here somewhere?
Probably.
A couple of them, I think.
It's like 15 or 20, and then you get.
Actually, or an Indian Guide project.
Or, yeah, materials.
I'd probably like it if we told them.
I think one of the things that we want to narrow down is one of the school districts, I want to say Winnetka or Wilmette, used community volunteers to build it. And I asked, and this will be a big question for us to do some investigation on, if the community builds, does our liability carrier cover? Because normally they will not cover unless we have somebody building it that way. So we have a lot of things to look at, but we need to make sure that we do it all thoughtfully.
Because when that equipment is put in the ground,
It's got to be done right.
it has
It's got to be done the right way.
So we just need to make sure that we're covering it. The other thing that I forgot to mention that Eileen reminded me is that obviously it goes along with the whole lead school connection as well, So we'd like to just at least start to see what we could do.
Yep.
Can the Eco Club start fundraising? Can we go for grants? That kind of thing.
So, just in full disclosure, I met with a Project Citizen team at the middle school this week, and one of their proposals, or what they're working on, is a outdoor ed classroom concept for the open green space. Not that they use it all, but they also have some other ideas about a field hockey field, which we had talked to Nate about a year ago, I guess, Mr. Blackburn, about that. So just, in a holistic view of the world, I know this is a little bit different because of age group and all that kind of stuff, but there is a recognized need, at least with the students, that more just to break up the monotony of the day,
Yes.
maybe to help relieve stress and get out of the school building, all that kind of stuff, that there will be at least a Project Citizen team coming to the board eventually. I think they try to get there to at least present their ideas that they're thinking about from an outdoor ed facility or space. I guess it's not a facility, space at the middle school as well.
And just so you know, I met with my Project Citizen team today, and that's going to be a whole other issue that they're coming to you on.
A different issue than what I just brought up.
Different.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, that they all are like
And
that.
I'm hearing all of these on March 1st, so.
So really what we're
March
looking
20th,
for is
whatever.
consensus that we'd like to see the investigation move forward in how we might make this happen.
And really move, and then as we review the strategic plan, we can go ahead and move forward
This
with.
is terrific, and the Alliance allowed us to get this far, as I recall,
Yes.
correct?
Absolutely.
So,
All been
it's
very,
incredible.
very supportive.
We had
Incredible.
wonderful teacher training as well from the company. They came out and gave us a 3-hour teacher training on how to use outdoor materials and be outside and embrace that within your learning.
And we were really impressed with the staff, because they weren't,
They were so good.
at first, they were like, why are we staying after school, and what are we doing? And
They did
they
so
jumped
great.
in like
Yeah.
third graders, into this, and they had a really good time.
And I'll remind everyone here that this is not the first public-private partnership that resulted in some opportunities for the district. The original green team and the district partnered on a series of grants to, help us ultimately achieve a LEED Silver building. So I think this is in that tradition.
And that's really where it stemmed from. It was from
Yeah.
Eco Club and teaching them on how to be earth stewards, but really also with that appreciation, being able to have their hands in those natural materials, to have the true appreciation for earth and that whole encompassing.
We want to thank all of you for,
Thank you.
and we will
miss
start
anything?
looking for that grant money.
No, we're good.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next we have the Alliance report, right?
I think we do.
Speaking of the Alliance, a couple times a year on your board calendars, you will see the Alliance report. Since we're videotaped now, we have to use that. So we will be putting that on our board planning calendar, and at the last meeting, when I talked to Todd, I asked him if he would make a short presentation tonight on all the things they're doing, so thank you.
Thanks for having me here. Good evening. I'm sure most of you know the Alliance has been Lake Bluff's educational foundation for 23 years. We've got some people like MJ who's come to our board meetings and some past members. We have some other Alliance board members here. Jamie Constantine's our vice president. Dom Dwelly worked on the outdoor project and is Barbara Siebel there too. So anyhow, we're a foundation. We raise money. We fund grants. Maybe one of the things that distinguishes us from PTO is we meet in the evening, so we have a lot of members who have daytime jobs and other professions, and I think that's one of our strengths. We've got 16 board members. We've got a chemical engineer, a biologist, a computer scientist, attorney, organizational leaders, MBA, two current university faculty members, a dean of students, marketing professionals, all kinds of people. So I think I'm very proud of our board. I think we bring a lot of professional experience and wide expertise. We also have people describe themselves as CEOs of their homes, so we have a wide range of members. Our process is basically to meet with teachers. We have grant coordinators who go out and per grade and meet with teachers, foster ideas. The teachers, of course, come up with the ideas, but then we help them figure out what can be funded, what kinds of things have been done before, what kinds of grants work out. Some of the grants we've done in the past, I sent out a fundraising letter. Won't go into too much detail, but again, we're very proud of all the things we've accomplished. So things from Math and Light, Lego Mindstorms, robotics kits. So our kids are learning how to make robots and program them with computers. We've had magnetism kits, playaway digital books, increased ingenuity with iPads. That's one of our, I think, main roles in some ways is to develop new ideas. So, you develop budgets and plan for the next year, but technology and education is always moving forward. So the iPads were announced, and of course there was no budget that year because it was something new. So we funded the first 5, and then they were used in the school, and that developed a lot of new ideas, and now it's part of the strategic technology plan, of course. And I'm sure you're aware that use in iPads at schools is skyrocketing for books, for all kinds of things. So, in fact, another grant we did in the last 18 months was to support the original iPads with a cart that programmed them, and the kindergarten teachers mentioned to our grant coordinators that, gee, it's hard to program, we have to do them one at a time, so we came up with this cart that you could program them all at once and save a lot of time. So it doesn't just take technology to help with education, you've got to provide the mechanism and the process and get the whole thing done. So lots of other things. Jennifer Harris author visits, that's a named fund we manage. There's another named fund named after Kathleen O'Hare that we funds the 8th graders going to the Washington trip who can't otherwise afford it. So those are named fund with specific donations to them. We've done summer book reading club, the Nature's Outdoor Education movie. Those were all just elementary schools. We have a whole pile of middle school too. We did some fitness equipment, Six Flags Math Day, Fine Arts flip cameras, Vernier probeware for 7th grade. As the president, I brought kind of a science focus a little bit, but we had very strong arts as well, continued that. The fiddles in the elementary school, a very groundbreaking program in which every first grader learns to play strings. Now I did get to the middle school, and Mr. Beasley commented to me, so all these string players are going to be arriving at the middle school. What are you going to do about that? So it seems with each grant, new grant possibilities come into being. Anyhow, and then initial funding for the book room, world language flashcards, historical fiction books, squirrelware system for the stage in the middle school so that they can use those for productions, support for the play itself, the Sound of Music play last year. So I like to think we're pretty broad range in the kinds of things we're supporting. But I think one of the most valuable things we do is sort of the process, and I think the educational classroom is a great example of that. So as you're guessing, Eileen here spearheaded the effort, but it was multiple teachers, multiple groups. The principal was on board, the superintendent was on board. They came to us for funding for the initial development, which we didn't have funding, but there was initially a question of, well, 2 days of consultants, it's not cheap. What'll happen then? We don't want it to die in the vein. So we initially said, well, let's study this a little bit. So we looked at it in multiple board meetings. We sponsored a movie in coordination with Open Lands called Nature's Child. And if you saw the Race to Nowhere, anybody see that movie? That kind of brought up a bunch of questions. And an answer to a chunk of those questions would be, go see this movie, Nature's Child, because it talks about, sort of more healthy things. They talked about a whole range of activities that I think most of you grew up like I did. You were outdoors more. And now we see our kids, they're indoors a lot. And some of the activities great, the world building of online simulations and stuff, but some of it's repetitive games, shoot 'em ups kind of stuff. So maybe that's not so reassuring, but sort of there's some reaction to the outdoor classroom that's sort of like, well, just park an old fire engine there, let the kids climb on it. But maybe that worked a generation ago. Now we're aware of risk and accidents and everything. So now it takes a structured activity to be outdoors. So in the following meetings, we showed that movie in coordination with Open Lands. So we got them interested in the project. They've subsequently voted the Open Lands group to a resolution to support us. Support the outdoor classroom, so that's a good thing. And a lot of the Open Land members are actually sort of post-child age, so it's a sort of older group. It is a mix, of course, but there's people who say, the school's doing that? Wow, that's great. So it's a matter of sort of an outreach kind of thing. So we had multiple meetings and looked at other studies, and now a lot of us have become very in touch with the whole notion of what it does for you. You see little articles about if you go backpacking, then your creativity score is double, and these kinds of little studies, sorts of things. So we sort of separated that process, and then as they both mentioned, our plan is to keep shepherding it and try to help with fundraising it. Our budget doesn't allow paying for the whole thing, so we can't help you there, but I think we can help build support from other groups and reach out to the rest of the community and encourage corporate donations under the Alliance. Some of the, say anything else about the outdoor room, if I've forgotten anything. Sometimes people ask about the coordination of PTO and Alliance. There've been a couple things where we both funded the same microscopes, I think, one year, but mostly coordination works quite well. There's grants we get that we say, gee, that's kind of more in PTO. PTO hands us things. We've done things together. Some people have brought up, oh, well, of course, they have one group fundraising and two group spending. It seems like the fundraising skills, sometimes there's more there, sometimes there's more with us. So over years, it's kind of wherever the talent lays, they seem to do better at fundraising. I'll admit, some of those PTO events I've been to lately are pretty impressive. So I think that's actually worked out and has been beneficial to our kids. So I don't perceive an issue there. We currently have one board member who sits on both the PTO and our board. We have in the past had a school board member that came to our board meetings. MJ used to do that. That would be nice to have. If someone wants to volunteer, we'd welcome that. If not, we'll do our best with these presentations. I think that's it. Any questions about the Alliance or directions? Or
I just appreciate what you're doing. What you do
Thank
for
you.
us.
Do you have any trending as to contributions? Or have you been trending up, trending down, status quo for some time?
Sure. 2000, our main fundraising is a fall fundraising later, late in the year, about November.
Mm-hmm.
So 2008, we got hammered because that was right when the economy was in free fall. So with contributions down, we ended up turning away grants in 2009. Donations recovered in 2010, grant requests didn't. When I took office, we sort of had a surplus of funds, so my project was to get that money spent. We shouldn't be sitting on any money that people have donated. We've done that. We have all these grants. That was a record number of grants I just read off in the whole history of the Alliance. So that's great. Now we've spent our money, so we're in a get more fundraising kind of mode. We had a decent set of donations in the fall, but we're sort of looking at following up with corporate donors. So I'd say we were kind of down, a bit up, and then a little bit down again. Sort of looking at that. Some people graduated up into the high school who had been big donors, and so maybe we're looking at kind of replacing some big donors that were, sort of get out there and talk more about the Alliance.
Thanks.
I want to thank you and all the Alliance for all your support. We are really lucky to have the Alliance and PTO in our district, and we just appreciate all you do for kids.
Okay.
We're excited about our future projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Todd, thank you very much for the update, and also thank you to the whole Alliance for all that you've done on this project and really keeping it going along, and we appreciate the continued offer to shepherd.
Thanks for the support.
Okay, Joanne Trahanis, Curriculum Review Cycle. Revised.
It didn't take long until we had to do this. As you recall, I brought a curriculum review cycle to you last year, and a couple of things have occurred. First of all, the National Science Foundation decided that they would, even though the National Common Core movement was originally going to stay with math and English language arts, that's as far as they were going to go. The National Science Foundation said, no, we're going to create a common set of science standards. They are still arguing over those. We will be entering draft 3, supposedly March 15th or something. But the science organizations are not agreeing right now on everything. However, our Anne Rochelle, who worked with your district before on the science, she is on those committees. And we're very fortunate in that our science program is not going to be far off from what's ever adopted. We might have to move some units in grade levels, but she was way ahead of the game on that one, so we should be in good shape. But we will have to rewrite according to the national standards. So what I put before you, and since you were kind enough to invite me back next year, my thought is to try to get, if the standards are out, at minimally a draft of all the curricular areas. So you will see next year we are going to attempt science and social studies if social studies comes out with their standards. But even if they don't, your social studies is up for review. Generally speaking, we went to online programs, but there wasn't a review at that time. And then we would do all the specials or the fine arts areas as well. And then the following year, 14-15, we would probably have some science and social studies that might fall over into that. You might not finish within a year. And it would be time for our technology plan that has to go to the state every few years. So that would be on that year. And then we would rest for 2 years and have full implementation and really just spend those 2 years upping the staff development on all the different areas that they would need to fulfill all the changes that are happening. So, and then the cycle goes to a more normal cycle where you're doing a major area, maybe a fine arts or whatever. So, and that still has to be tweaked depending on what actually gets finished next year. But that would also allow for the position, for who would be taking over for me, to kind of get used, complete some things, but then have some time to really get to know the curriculum and go in and see it being used in classrooms, and then begin the review process under that new person.
It also allows for us to get used to Park, because the way Joanne's got it timed is we can actually be spending those 2 years not only learning the curriculum and really supporting the teachers in professional development, but getting used to the online testing and what we need to be doing.
What we have to tweak for that, and the teachers will be working on assessments during all of this time, local or formal assessments within the areas, common assessments is what it, besides the part, that's the national one, or the state one.
They're going to need to do to prove student growth for
Right.
not only their teacher evaluations, but for our school improvement plans. So they all go hand in hand.
Right.
But I think I look forward to those 2 years. The staff is really working hard. We've got so many curricular things going on.
And I have to commend the staff, because they are doing unbelievable work. And I will say, I think it's paying off. We've received 3 different calls this week. We have Northbrook District coming to observe in our classrooms. The Tri-District, the foreign language department at the high school, asked that our foreign language teachers present all the changes that have occurred with the work they've been doing over the last couple of years on Friday. We have
Some of our math teachers are going over to present to them too, aren't
yes,
they?
and then Lake Forest sent 3 representatives to our language arts meeting yesterday, language arts committee, and they're sending teachers over to observe in our classrooms with our math program. So the teachers are working hard, and they're being recognized by lots of school districts that want to see what's going on. So this is really just an update for you to say, yeah, you remember that plan last year? Just scratch that, and we have a new one now. So.
Well, not completely. I mean, you've
right.
laid a great foundation already, and we're tweaking it and making
Right.
improvements.
And it's really an exciting change, too, so thank you so much, Joanne, for that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thanks for all your great work.
Thank you.
Jane, an update on capital projects.
Hopefully this document looks familiar to you. We looked at it a year ago. I've updated it a little bit. And we're really kind of referring to maintenance and facilities. And what I've got highlighted in yellow are the capital projects we're proposing to do pretty much over this coming summer. Replacing the classroom floor tile at the middle school was already on our agenda. We've already bid out the asbestos abatement portion of that, so all we have left to do is bid out the installation of the new floor tile. And we are getting pricing now on replacing the door hardware for the classroom doors. So hopefully that is a project that we can push forward this summer, and teachers at the middle school I know will be very happy. So you can tell them we're looking to get that done. And the biggie is the boiler replacements. There's 2 boilers at the middle school. And this number is significantly higher than what we had looked at before. And actually, we had pushed out the boiler replacement a few years down the road. But I got a survey among Lake County school districts. We all responded to look at gas usage spent per square foot of school buildings. And ours was at the middle school like off the charts. Our boilers are very inefficient. Basically, they either run full steam ahead or not at all. We have very little control over them. So we're looking at replacing those. I'm going to present a better estimate, although I think 300 is a little high. Hopefully, I'll know that number towards the end of the month, and also give you projected savings in gas costs for an efficient boiler. So that'll help save some money on the investment of the new boilers. So we really like to proceed with that this summer, and that can be done pretty easily. And then go ahead.
To what do you attribute the change in the?
Well, I talked to Steve Miller, and I think what he had actually priced out was just doing some upgrades to the existing boilers. It's certainly now, in talking to him and looking at it, there's no way we could replace boilers at $60,000. So this is a full-blown replace both.
And you talked about them being very inefficient boilers, the current ones. Do we know if those comparator school districts have much more recent models, or?
I don't know. This was all of Lake County, every school building, not just district school building. These boilers are about 17 years old. We expect the lifespan of a boiler to be about 20. We probably could push them out longer than that, certainly, but we'd like to move ahead with this because it's
They're way out of warranty already, so.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So whether we push it down 3 years, 5 years, we can do that, but we're spending a lot of money in natural gas costs.
Are you going to look at, when looking at the different boiler options, obviously that's a big ticket item, the payback period is one of the factors that you're going to have to use to
I've got
distinguish
Siemens.
between the different approaches?
Well, I don't know what you, tell me what you mean. I've got a company specializes in this.
Well, when
that's coming in to look for places and recommend a more efficient.
Right. There's degrees of efficiency that you can build into a system. And the more efficient it is, the more cost savings you get, but the more expensive the unit.
Yeah.
So over time,
yes.
you're going to have to do that calculation.
And that's what they're going to present
Right.
to me later in the month.
Okay.
Okay, so they just came in with the MEP engineers and looked through everything. So they're working on their proposal to get back to me. And I told them I needed it by the end of February. So.
Are there any concerns about the physical space that the boiler has to?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. Not at all.
Where is it currently housed?
It's down in the basement of the middle school.
How they get it out of the building?
Choir room.
Chop it into pieces, probably.
Got an asbestos wrap on any of it?
No, I
They'd
think
get a new
most
one
of
in,
that
too.
asbestos had been abated when we did the renovation work, just in 08, 09, whenever that was. They did a lot of that then. If they find any, it'll be minimal and something that can easily be done. We're going to have our environmental people on site anyway, beginning of the year, because of the floor tile asbestos abatement, so
You don't
they can
anticipate,
respond quickly.
you don't anticipate any problems taking the old boiler out or putting the new boilers in?
No.
Infrastructure-wise or whatever, okay.
Usually the newer things are much smaller than.
Normally, yeah.
I mean, I'm hoping as we do the strategic plan, that there's going to be a review of the facilities, and I'm curious to see if any changes to the middle school are going to come out of that. So this work, if it were done, how does that combine with?
You mean, should we add on to the building?
Well, let's say, for example, if at the end of the strategic plan, it was suggested that we add something onto the building, or make some major changes to the building, how would this
It
tie in
depends
with
on
that?
what you, it depends on square footage, basically, I think what you're talking about.
You mean in order to have the boiler support whatever, if there was anything added on?
It needs to be sized appropriately or whatever,
Right.
okay.
I mean, would it make sense to hold off on doing that? Or, I don't know what the timeframe's going to look like for facility.
I'll have an answer for you by the end of the month.
Yeah, I was going to say, that
Well,
might
and
be
we're
a.
gonna
Because I don't think it's going to be that big a deal.
Yeah, and we're going to have preliminary information, but no work would be even contemplated for the summer, so we would have time.
Yeah, we were looking at.
Yeah, we're looking at doing this over
No,
the
that's what I'm
summer.
saying, but we would have strategic planning information
Yeah.
long
But-
before we got to.
But as far as the technical, to answer her question in a technical way, it could be such that what they're replacing could accommodate another 4,000, 5,000 square foot, or there would be something to add on at the time, so we're not doing this and then having to rip it out and do something.
Or replacing
You
the
make a
tiles
valid-
and that
yeah,
kind of
you make a
stuff.
valid point, and so I can't respond to that, just, I don't have the technical knowledge, but it may be a simple answer, but I'll have that answer for you by then.
When, I think along those lines, when the architects looked at the space that we have available in the middle school, Was there any consideration to the boilers being maybe moved a few feet here or there? I mean, is there anything to be?
You gotta see where they
gained?
are. I mean, there is nowhere to move them in this space in the basement.
And they're gonna take up the same, to your question, they're gonna
It's
take
a
up the
boiler
same
room.
basic space?
It's a boiler room.
There's nothing to be
Yeah,
gained
even
in
if the
terms of
neighborhood's smaller, I mean, it's-
reconfiguring our space in the basement
No,
or anything?
no. It's like a confined, very confined boiler room, and if you have to have a boiler room in the basement, it's kind of down tucked underneath, and it's.
Concrete block walls and all that, if I remember.
Yes.
Right, they're
You
not
actually have
walls, not walls that are
There's
easily
actually
moved.
like 2 steps down into it off of the floor level of the basement.
I think the other piece is for security, the hardware on the locks at middle needs to be done this summer. The other thing that we would be looking into would be either for both schools and the district office, or just both schools. And I need to contact the village, and that's installation of panic buttons. So we'll be looking into that this summer too. So those are just things that we're working on. Does anybody else have any questions on that? Okay.
On the whole thing, or is that what you just specifically said?
On the
Highlighted
expenditures from
changes.
the summer.
Oh, for the summer, no.
These items in the 1 to 3 years that are not highlighted at all, are they just considered, okay, maybe that's years 2 and 3 and not for this upcoming year? Like rekey?
We may look at completing the master key update, especially if we're gonna replace hardware. That's something that, although it's kind of a big ticket item, we're gonna consider that just regular maintenance. If it's something we need to do, we'll proceed, build it into the budget. The loft space, we cannot really reconfigure it the way we want to because it violate life safety code. We had BLDD look at that. So that's kind of off the books. And the front entrance really is something we don't want to do if we are going to reconfigure the whole entryway, make it accessible. So that's just kind of.
They go together.
Yeah, we would not do that if we do the other. So otherwise, it's just.
Basically, you're asking us to focus on the highlighted items.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And even though some of them were originally further out, we're maybe moving them
Yes.
closer.
Yes.
Mark, did you have another question?
It was a little farther out. On the elementary school, they got nothing scheduled for 10 years out?
It's a new building.
No, it's new now, but in 10 years, it doesn't need
I think-
maintenance? or-
Well, it's maintenance. Well, maintenance is one thing, but a capital expenditure is another. We're not going to need to replace any HVAC or the
That
roof.
big stuff
or
within
any
10
of
years?
that,
All right.
And those are things that we'll
That's
be
good. I
looking
just wanted to
at.
make sure.
We'll be looking at that a little bit as the strategic plan unfolds too.
They've got a special program for systems maintenance as part of the LEAD program that basically helps facilities keep that stuff running efficiently and running the way it's intended to run, so it's a little bit more, you get more bang for the buck over time based on that planning process.
One thing that we talked about some meetings ago was maintenance of the lawn, of the landscaping. And one of the possible solutions was a sprinkler system.
Yeah, we've been trying to get pricing on that, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think the PTO was looking at funding that. Is that correct? Okay, she's just smiling.
You know what, I think the elementary PTO is looking at it, as opposed to the big.
Yeah,
Correct.
they've asked us to provide pricing, and I think Steve has talked to a gentleman just in the last couple of weeks, and I think we're close to getting that, but, so that's where we are on that.
For the elementary school or both?
For the elementary school.
And not for like anything over at the middle school?
No.
Okay.
And I do believe we had decided to table until we got more information about what we might do with these before we spent much money on that, right? Was that correct?
That's right.
I think we were moving ahead more with elementary.
Well, elementary is definitely the priority, I would say.
Fine use.
And if we get that outdoor classroom, we'll take care of that whole backspace.
Any other questions on capital projects? We're going to move right into student fees for 13-14. We will be bringing this for vote at the end of the month, so we need some discussion on this. Jane, you want to take over on that one?
This fall, when we were talking about our levy and fund balances, et cetera, at that time, I believe we built into our projections to eliminate transportation fees. And so from those discussions, when we adopt fees for the 2013-14 school year, administration is recommending doing away with transportation fees. Right now, you have about a 2-year fund balance in your transportation fund.
Which is like how much?
2 years worth of expenses. Expenses are, right now, I think, Mark, about $450,000.
So are we,
It's in that fund.
so
in the
are we
transportation.
effectively abating fees for 2 years, only to bring them back in year 3?
I don't think you'll have to bring it back that soon, no.
I mean, that's what you start
You
doing
c-
something, you gotta, you
you're-
stick with it, or,
Right, for the fiscal year 2012, I believe we collected just over $75,000 in transportation fees. This year, we're going to be under that. Our enrollment for transportation is a little down. I'd say it's probably closer to 70.
The source of those funds in there, is it taxes
Tax
or?
levy.
It is levy, it's not,
We-
mostly the levy or mostly fees?
Most of it's levy. We also get a little bit of money from the state. We claim special education transportation costs. So we get, what we're supposed to get, we're getting maybe $100,000 state reimbursement, but that could stop at any moment, or they could prorate it down at any moment. And they owe us money from last year still.
The reason I ask the question about the source of most of the funds, if it's levy, by abating fees, we're helping a very specific part of the community there, not the whole community. So I wonder if that's the.
Well, and just for factual information, most school districts in the state of Illinois cannot charge children to ride the bus by law. We are an exception, and there's very few school districts, and most of us all are in this part of the world. It's an exception because we are a common school district. That is, we're not consolidated, and we're not a unit district. That gives us a loophole in this law that we can actually charge children to ride the bus.
I have to say that getting rid of this fee has never made any sense to me at all. And I have 2 kids who ride the bus. I'd love to not write that check in the fall or the summer. It just doesn't make sense to me because when we're talking about struggling to find funds for the outdoor classroom, I'd rather spend the money, yeah, well,
Different
okay,
funds.
different funds.
I think that's the piece you have to look at. That's a separate, we're talking a separate fund just for transportation. So all we can spend money out of that is transportation. And we've got funds in there that we're not using, and it's accumulating.
But you can set a different rate on the levy, can't you? And work it down over time? It doesn't have to be the same point, whatever.
But you can't come back with your levy. You can come back with registration fees.
No, over time, you can reduce the levy that's specific to transportation, just to work down.
But you can't bring it back.
I understand that.
Okay.
But you're saying, the ridership is going down too, so.
But you can bring fees back.
If we needed to bring fees back, then we could, so that gives us the option of doing that.
Is there a reason why it's all or nothing? Is there a middle ground here that we reduce these fees? Because when you look at the numbers for, 3 or 4 children, it's pretty hefty check to write, but is there?
We reduced it 3 years ago.
We did?
Yeah.
I remember that.
It's relative to getting more ridership, though.
So do we think that if we eliminated them, more people would take advantage? I guess, is that one
The
of the thoughts?
recommendation comes from the discussions
Right.
involving fund balances.
This year. And I think the key part is, we have 2 years of funds.
Right.
And I think if we keep working, we don't want to accumulate money that we know we're not going to be spending. So maybe we might need to put a letter out saying for at least
the first couple of years, we're not gonna need them. I think we took it from all of you that this was an area, especially in that transportation fund, that we could kind of reduce our funding.
I don't remember any discussion about it. I remember this is a suggestion, it's one possibility. So that's why I was,
We
But
could
now
always,
is the time
curious
to
about it.
address registration fees. That's why that's why the recommendation now is because it's when you adopt the
So
annual
but if we reduce something, it needs to happen in the realm of transportation, and it can't apply to anything else, right?
That is correct,
That's
and
right,
we have
it's in the
2 years,
transportation
two years' worth of reserve in this fund, which is a significant amount of reserve in this one fund, and there's no other way to spend it but on transportation, so we only have one way to reduce it.
If you don't want to eliminate it, if you want to reduce it, if you want to leave them alone.
yeah.
So
We just need guidance to.
We just need to
Well, it makes more sense now that you're telling me it can only happen out of that one fund. I missed that
This
point.
strictly goes into the transportation fund to help cover transportation costs.
I recall some hope when we built the new school that we would get increased bus ridership and eliminate an awful lot of the cars that travel every day, environmentally and traffic-wise and everything else. It didn't seem to change when we reduced the fee, whether it would change significantly with no fee.
I guess, maybe it's worth figuring that out, right?
Don't I recall the survey parents said even if it was reduced to almost nothing, they wouldn't put their kid, I mean, the people who are riding are gonna ride, and the people who.
Is that right?
I mean, they're gonna ride with their parents. Like, yeah, I mean, your kids, they ride and you pay, and mine's the same way, so.
Yeah.
I don't think
I think it's more of a personal choice for families. So you just need to give us guidance.
Okay, so, I mean, I have no objections based on that conversation. It's fine with me.
Real quick, Jane, some kindergarten parents incoming have a little sticker shock over the registration fee. It's my impression that we're actually fairly reasonable compared to some of the peer districts around here. Can you kind of validate that?
I think we are less, certainly, than our neighbors to the south. I don't know what their fee is. Ours is 2,500, has been for 8 years or
Right,
whatever.
right.
We are lower than
Okay.
there, yes.
Libertyville's quite a bit higher. I just saw this somewhere.
Are you talking about the full-day kindergarten?
Could have been in the paper. There was
I
something
will
about this.
share, because we just had an email on that, both Jane's group and my group, and it's a wide variety. I would say we place in the middle or towards the lower.
That's what I thought.
And I was kind of surprised, I was surprised about that, not having had this option in other districts. So I would say we're in the middle or the lower end of that. I was kind of surprised.
Can I go
about
back to transportation for just 1 second? And that, you said that a few districts can charge. Is it typical for districts that can charge to charge for transportation, or are we unusual? in that
I don't
respect?
know, I can't tell you who can and who can't. I only know
Who
the
does.
districts along the North Shore, many of them charge.
Okay.
Which, when I was new to the district, I'm like, you can't do that, it's illegal. Well, I found out, yes, we can because of this common school district
I see.
definition, which is not prevalent throughout the rest of the state.
It does sound like the direct way to work down this particular reserve, so. And
So is everybody comfortable with us bringing this to you at the end of the month? So student fees would remain the same, and transportation fees would be eliminated for next year. Okay.
Plan just to eliminate it for 1 year?
Well, that's what you'll be voting on this year, I think, keeping in mind that.
Same
let's-
philosophy as we had before, 1 year at a time.
Okay.
Proposed school calendar, what you have in front of you is the 13-14 and the 14-15 proposed school calendars. Joanne and Ann really guided me in this. We did have a teacher from each building that have been doing calendar committees for years that run things by staff. One of the good questions that I received, which I thought I would explain, is why do we start school on a Thursday or a Friday? And it's very important to know, and I'm going to put myself in this spot too. The first week of school is so physically exhausting as you're trying to teach the kids the new routines. We really will spend this year 3 days in institute days that between all the procedures and all the learning and getting the classrooms all ready, to have kids for a full week is very exhausting for staff. Having them for a couple days and then having the kids go home for the weekend and come back for a full week, I think is better all the way around. With that being said, I will tell you, our staff is about divided half and half. Half would love to have a first week of school being full. The other half are saying, Jean, there would be no way. It's physically and emotionally exhausting. So what we did was pretty much take the calendar that we had this year, translate it for the 13-14, and then kind of work through our staff development days. We did align with Lake Forest, so we changed, kind of switched off the calendars there. When I bring the vote to you at the end of the month, I'd like to send it to the other, like Country Day wanted our schedule to make sure that they align also with us as much as we can. And remember, as I put in the notes, the first and last days of school next year will be full days.
That seemed like a significant change. I remember this year, we were like 1 hour.
It's the law. It's
On
the law
Friday.
beginning July 1st.
Right. So these 2 days, Thursday, Friday, right, seemed more substantial than in prior years when I've had a similar concern. Leanne, 2 full days seems like sort of worth it to
Worth it more than,
an hour.
But for the teachers, you've got to remember, they're still putting in their full time
Yeah.
that week. Because they're coming back, I think our new teacher institute is Monday, if we have new teachers. So, that's the answer to that question.
Jean, you mentioned coordinating with Lake Forest. For those families who have one or more children in both high school and elementary school, that can become an issue when holiday weekends and such are split. And I just did a quick, printout of the high school calendar for 13-14, and there are, at least besides the start of the year, there's a couple of instances where the high school's chosen one way, like a Thursday, Friday, whereas we've chosen Friday, Monday, and then the opposite on another. One's around the Martin Luther King Day and one's around Easter weekend. And I wondered if that was looked at.
It was. We really try to gear towards the Christmas holiday and the Easter holiday, and try to align those.
And Thanksgiving, I suppose.
And Thanksgiving.
Right.
But there are, to be able to totally coordinate that is virtually impossible with what we're doing.
And spring break.
And spring break.
But you're saying Easter didn't coordinate between the two?
Easter weekend does not coordinate with the high school in terms of days off, nor does Martin Luther King weekend. And I just know it's a hassle for parents with,
We do.
one child in, one off on one day, and then the other end of that, they've got the opposite taking place. And I didn't know if that was worth going back and looking at.
We did take a look at that, and it was kind of the direction from everybody that's done this on the committee, that we align our winter break and spring breaks, and then everything else, we kind of have to go with our own calendar,
But
so.
the committee only represents the interests of the staff, correct? I mean, I see that as important.
Kids.
Well,
We look at the testing schedules and all the other things too.
And I might add that the committee, meaning staff, advocated for parents too, because last year, there was a concern that the high school had late starts and we had early dismissals on the same day. So this school year, we changed our early dismissals to try to help parents, because that was difficult for parents. And we did that same thing next year too, and they really looked at blocks of time for learning for kids, and
That's what we were trying to
that was sort of how the institute days.
Difference between a Friday and a Monday.
right.
How do you work that out mentally?
What we tried to do is, we would look at the month and see what days we were already off or doing early release, so that you're not always taking the same days. It's there's no formula for it. If there's any specific concerns, we can take a look at it.
Well, those, you said
Well,
Martin
I
Luther
guess
King and Easter.
Yeah, Martin Luther King and the Easter weekend. I don't know the degree to which it affects families. I don't know how many families have a child in each, but those would be the two that might ought to be given a hard look at. And whether it's for this upcoming year or making sure in the following year that it's looked at.
What exactly was it Easter weekend? Because I know we aligned our break with.
We're we've got pegged the Friday and the Monday around Easter weekend, and the high school has the Thursday, Friday off prior to that.
Next year?
This upcoming, yeah.
Yeah, this coming year.
Right, but don't they have another day off earlier in week 2 or something? Or week
No.
1?
We do. Because we
We have
do.
We have an early dismissal.
We have early dismissal, but I'm talking about a day off.
There's no day off that, other day off that week, but we have an early dismissal.
We'll sit
Strange,
down-
'cause
we'll sit
Easter's-
down.
I'm blessed not to have a child in each, but I've
Change.
heard from families who have a child in each, and they, they're always asking, why don't they get together?
25% of the kids never get to high school change.
Yeah, you're right, Al.
We'll take a good look at it. I think we were taking a look at testing schedules and numbers of days before all that.
A dozen balls you got in the air around that schedule, and it's really difficult to.
Easter does seem strange, though, because it's right around spring breaks, and spring break is always coordinated. It's so,
Spring break is coordinated, and we took, I thought we have the Monday off, right?
this year, we have the Monday off, but it's, it would be worth looking at, I
We'll take a look
agree.
at it. We'll take a look at it. Any other comments on calendars? The 14-15 calendar, again, is just the framework. Transition, oh, wait, I don't want to do that. Any other questions on 14-15? Transition report, I think my comments were very explicit on the transition report. Did anybody have any questions on my transition plan report?
Not long enough, Jane.
Not long enough?
Kidding.
Detail.
Yeah, insufficient
Where's all the
detail.
detail?
The detail came for the detail for the board meeting this week. How's that? So I think, according to my plan, I had to report out on my transition plan by March 1st. So this meets that particular requirement.
Duly noted.
It was kind of fun to go through it, though, I have to tell you, because a lot of it I got done the first 2 months between all the meetings we had,
It
so.
brought back a lot of happy memories.
It did, it did. Board candidate training, if you'll notice, in your packets, I had 2 emails that I sent out. I really wanted to do it in 2 different meetings. Not best for the board candidates, and I realized that, nor did I really know about the candidate forum. So I went back and redid it, so both sessions are gonna be identical. And both sessions will cover the same materials, the handouts are all getting run off, and that will be available. First one is this Friday, and then the next one, I think, is February 28th at 5:30. Questions on that?
I think it's great that you're doing it.
Yeah, I do too.
I appreciated that.
And I will, just some things, I think I said in the email, I'll go through board agreements, the board calendar, all the board trainings you've had. We'll talk a little bit about budget, a little bit about special ed, a little bit about curriculum, talk about the website, how board does business, just the basics.
Works on all those policies.
So much more than.
We will not be discussing policies to very
Give them a couple hundred pages of policies.
for homework. We could assign homework. New business, the only thing I wanted to say is I too met with my Project Citizen group today. Very exciting. I really enjoyed it. Actually, Mark's son was in the class and he was one of the note takers in class, listening very intently. It was exciting. So, anybody else have new business?
No.
You want to take over?
Okay. And nobody else has any new business, correct? Any old business? Okay. We have a couple of items that we do need to take care of tonight for action. The first is personnel. We had talked about this previously, but so that we can get moving on the summer school program, could I have a motion that the Board of Education approves the personnel recommendation per the attachment, and that is Carly Quick as the summer school coordinator?
So moved.
Second.
Al, can we have a roll call?
Yes. Mary Jane Brady?
Yes?
I lost my list here. Go around the room. Eric Wagner?
Yes.
Susan Ryder?
Yes?
Ann Chanel?
Yes.
Barry Carney?
Yes.
Mark Berry?
Yes.
Al Pfeifhouse, yes.
Okay, that motion carries. The next item of business we have is to approve the recreational Lake Bluff Middle School ski trip to Grand Geneva Resort. Could I have a motion that we approve that recreational Lake Bluff Middle School ski field trip to Grand Geneva Resort, Wisconsin on February 22nd, 2013? Second?
Second.
Any discussion on that?
So, Gene, I don't know if you're serious, but you talked about, are there any waiver forms, and where do you stand on all that?
I think, let me see how fast I can get waiver forms drawn up. Did you have the kids sign any waiver forms? We'll be working on waiver forms. We'll be working on waiver forms in answer to your question. And this might be something based upon our policy discussion, that we look for another outside group to sponsor it, or we come up with some kind of disclaimer, or, so Nate, how many days do we have to get this together?
2, a week and a half.
Oh.
Before they get on the bus.
Okay. And they could just bring their waivers with them to get on the bus. That could be like their permission slip, right?
Have there never been a school I know there's a huge waiver from the ski resort, but my recollection was there was a school waiver a few years ago, but maybe I'm not remembering correctly. That has happened.
Yeah, there's 2 forms that are required or have been required. The permission slip, of course, and then there's a lengthy form that anyone who would go to a ski resort would fill out.
Right.
It says the ski resort isn't liable.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
So
right.
can we just copy that? And
So
insert-
we have a liability waiver form, but that's been around for a long time. So to respond, yeah, Gene, we would probably want to have.
I will have Terry send us something tomorrow from district for district liability.
Okay.
And I would really like it, even though I know it wouldn't be cool, if the kids wore their helmets.
Yeah.
See, I'd say I'd more than really like.
Yeah, I can't even imagine sending kids without helmets.
No helmets, no go.
How do you?
I'll be wearing my helmet, and okay. So for a fee, so yeah.
But they could bring, if they brought their own, then we wouldn't require them to rent, I presume?
Can you just bring any helmet, though?
Well, it's just, having not gone down this road before, I'm not opposed to it. You know, I'm not also, you know, would a bike helmet suffice? I don't know. Would they prefer to wear their skateboard helmet? Probably. Is that sufficient for skiing? I don't have an answer to that question.
But they do have helmets there, right?
Yeah.
They do.
We make them optional.
And when do you collect the money for this trip? Already
Well,
did that?
we announced it today, and we certainly don't have to proceed with it, but we had to get an idea of
No, I'm just
numbers.
saying, could you add $8 to the trip dollar amount and just have them all?
It's 5 for a rental,
helmets?
and it's on the form.
Yeah, but it's as an option. And I think we're saying we would want it to be a
If you don't have your own,
automatic.
you get to get one.
Bring one or pay for it.
I can
How do you
communicate
feel about it? Because you're going to be supervising the trip, so it's going to have to be manageable.
And just another question that occurs to me, if helmets are not rented by everyone, does it have enough helmets for that many people? in this?
You don't know what they're
I don't know. I'd have to. It's hard for me to know how many helmets we would need.
How many kids are showing?
First of all, even if they tell me they've got their own, I know kids will show up without them. So then, it's logistically a challenge, but I don't disagree with it.
How many kids are you expecting, roughly?
We'll cap it at 100.
And do you usually get 100?
Yeah, usually. Last year, we were closer to 85. We didn't have as many.
So I will work on getting the waiver tomorrow from Terry, and you and I can work on the helmet situation, because I think
You know, there's some place called the Snowflake Club, which sponsors trips and all that kind of stuff. It's a
PTO
private.
was talking to me about that.
You should just see what their requirements are, because many of these kids probably belong to that too.
Guy from Lake Bluff runs that, right? I forget.
Just check into it, you know, see how they manage that kind of stuff.
You know what, you and I
Just
will
give
work on
Yodel.
that tomorrow.
There's one out at Williams Ski House or something like that. That's equipment rental. But
Any other discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Blackmer.
enjoy the trip.
Bowling.
Yeah, with all these cats.
Bowling sounds good.
So what happens then when we have a motion and then we have discussion about it where we say, well, we would want there to be helmets, we would want there to be liability waivers. Do we change the wording of the motion so that it says that, or?
I think you changed the wording of the motion. You have a motion on the floor, so you have to vote that down and then come up with a new motion.
Okay,
No,
so
Eric thinks differently. Do you want to just change the wording of the motion?
So what you're
can
saying
amend
is
that motion. You
your
can
approval
amend it.
would be contingent upon making sure that every student had the helmet.
The only problem is we don't know if we can do that.
Right, I mean,
We're
that's.
We're gonna check into it, but we don't
That would be
know.
my concern. I mean, could we direct administration to make all reasonable efforts to make that happen?
Make sure that kids are wearing the helmets to the best of our ability. Because I don't know how many they have there. Joanne, do you know a lot about skiing?
No, all I'm gonna say is that, I know I have to go there.
Do we refund those children who we don't permit to ski? They pay in advance. You didn't come with a helmet. We have to commit to a certain number of lift tickets. I'm in a position where I'm telling a child who either A, won't wear a helmet, didn't bring $5 to buy a rental helmet. Now do we refund them and they sit in the lodge? Those are all the questions we'll have to face that night, guaranteed.
Bored kids, right?
That's why I think.
Can the parents come and pick? I mean, yeah, I can communicate all this in advance,
I think we have to say, well, we need direction from you because
Well, I think the
we
waiver.
can do our best.
If the
but-
waiver provides us protection, then we
Right.
should just be strongly recommending the use of helmets, right?
And making the,
I mean,
in the
I'm
motion.
not a lawyer, but I'm just saying.
Could I also just say that, I just caution you, because just to tell kids to bring a helmet that you don't know.
I know, I'm
is
really
appropriate or
hesitant on
not, it could do damage.
Well, that's another good point.
I mean, I think a
I'd rather
week's
have
time
them.
is not much time to ask all of these decisions to be made. I think,
I can
think
get
you
the
gotta be
waiver done,
cautious.
but that's the only thing I can promise.
So but the waiver's done correctly,
Right.
then I just say you have to strongly recommend it,
The only
Students
experience I've
should
had
wear
with
a
helmets thus far is a request to require helmets for all students riding bikes to school. And that's been challenging. Now, this is different in the sense that we're departing from school together in a school-sponsored activity, though they're arriving, I agree, they should all be wearing helmets, please understand.
But it might not.
It's also different in that you're asking the school district to sponsor the activity, which puts the school district liable for anything that happens to the kids while they're on the trip.
Before the waiver.
Yeah, the waiver has to be constructed appropriately to avoid any liability.
I will have Terry work on the waiver. I think the motion should read, the waiver is mandatory. Kids cannot go without the waiver being signed by a parent.
That I agree with.
Yes, at minimum.
So-
Would that be part of the motion, though?
I would
Is
make-
that more of an administrative function to make?
I
sure
would,
that
I would put it in the motion, so it gets in the record. And then I will tell you the administration function is Nate will do his absolute best to get the kids to wear helmets. But I think it's, to a certain degree, he can do what he can do.
And once they're there, it doesn't mean they're gonna keep the helmet on.
Right.
Well, that's, yeah.
that is surely the case. I mean, the kids can bring a helmet and they've got a locker and they could put it in there. So I think the waiver here is key. I think the simplest thing to do here is let's take a vote on this motion and let's set out a new motion. Okay, so Al, can we have a roll?
Why don't you amend it? Because you're voting on the approval of the trip and just say with a waiver. Amend the motion.
Okay, so I'm going, Eric, you actually,
Do you have wording for that?
so we are going to amend the motion that is on the floor.
Right.
Okay? And the new motion is that the Board of Education approves the recreational Lake Bluff Middle School ski field trip to Grand Geneva Resort, Wisconsin on February 22nd, 2013, such that each student must have a signed waiver of liability for the school district created by district council for that purpose before they may attend the trip.
Perfect.
What she said.
So moved.
That'll be on the videotape, so that's okay.
Such that each student must have a signed waiver
Created by our district council for that purpose before they may attend the trip. And Terry moved,
And I
and
think
I will second it.
No, I moved.
And can we have a roll call?
Yes.
Shorthand now.
When I'm ready. Susan Ryder,
Yes.
Mark Berry,
Yes.
Leanne Charlot,
Yes.
Eric Wagoner,
Yes.
Al Pfeifhouse, yes. Terry Carney,
Yes.
Mary Jane Brady.
Yes. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Oh, look at how easy that is. And a second?
Yes, you may.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Wait, you gotta have cupcake.